I had the chance to go out with my camera one last time before leaving Arkansas and heading home for New Mexico. That's the great thing about Arkansas, just punch up trail or park in your favorite maps app and you're going to end up somewhere cool. This shot of this family of deer, it's not great, it's not even good. I didn't like the light at all, really. I didn't like the lens I had on. I didn't like where I was standing in relation to them. But it was like a real moment happening in front of my camera, so I had to take it. But I was very recently talking about how spoiled we are as photographers. The phrase embarrassment of riches comes to mind regarding camera selection. Everything is just so easy and so amazing nowadays. And rather than lusting after what you can't have, what you don't have, what you can't afford, appreciating what you already have, the camera you already own, seems like a far more sensible course of action. And that's something I specifically wanted to focus on. So, to that end, this started out as a 5-year review of the Canon EOS R. That's the camera I already own. A glowing review was my intention. Granted, I've seen that video before, but I figured I'd just keep that in mind, go do some shooting, and in the process of doing it, it would probably become something else. Anyway, the topic would evolve. And boy did it, because I ended up buying a new camera. The Canon R5. Kind of an uncreative, unimaginative, and undaring choice on my part. Very mainstream choice. Also just an iteration on the camera I already own, a single generation. I mean, it's a little complicated because the EOS R actually doesn't fit into a category. But I guess it's an interesting choice only in the sense of it itself is an older camera at this point, reaching the end of its life cycle. Why wouldn't I just wait for the next version? Well, I'll get into that. So I ordered it on the way home, picked it up at Best Buy, same day, which is great. The first thing I wanted to do was try out animal eye tracking. And I'm not replacing my EOS R with the R5. I'm going to use them both. But animal eye tracking is one of the key ways the EOS R was not meeting my needs. And there are several, and I think that's relevant to the review that I want to do. But if you don't need that, then you don't need that. Photos of my own cat are important to me, but I also do animal portraits for a living, and that's certainly important to me. The only thing this gives me that I couldn't do before, and couldn't isn't the word, what it gives me is speed. I can sort of move in and get the shot before she has time to process what's happening. I'm sure there are cameras with better animal eye tracking, but this is good enough for me. It's fucking miraculous. This is the EOS R with no animal eye tracking. And I just wanted to see how long it would take for her to go away. This is pretty typical behavior of my cat and most cats. Without animal eye tracking, this is my typical strategy where I just preset the focal point to where I think her eye is going to land. And then I either nail it or I have to focus and recompose to compensate. But either way, there's time that is required to set that, even if it's just a few seconds. And a lot of times by then, the moment's over. And with animal eye tracking, I feel like the quality of my animal portraiture is going to increase because I feel like there's no chance for the moment to pass. Flippy screens brought about a big upgrade in quality for my animal portraits, and I think eye tracking will similarly. And by quality, I'm referring to the quality of the moments I can capture. Not referring to like megapixels, because that doesn't matter as much to me. So here I am back on the EOS R. This is, I'm illustrating another thing that annoys the fuck out of me. It's that secondary stutter after you take the shot. I don't mind that there's either a frozen moment or a blackout, but that secondary stutter drives me crazy. And so it's really nice to see that they've eliminated it on the R5. When I want to capture video through the HDMI port like I'm doing here, I can do so without overthinking it now, without kind of lingering on the moment in order to edit out that stutter. I understand that's not a typical concern, not a big deal, but it was a big deal to me. That's going to save me a lot of work and extra CPU cycles in my brain. It is worth noting that if you, like, machine gun off 1,000 shots, it still stutters like crazy. I don't shoot that way, so it's resolved to my satisfaction, but not actually 100% resolved. Just worth noting. But on my long drive home, I had a lot of time to think, and I came to realize that my desire to buy this camera or that camera, not all of those desires are coming from the same place. Some are just wants, and some are actually needs. That is, there's not one thing eliciting that feeling. There are two separate things. One which is legitimate, that you should pay attention to, and one which just wants to get you in trouble, spend money you don't have. But yeah, my needs have evolved in the past 5 years. 5 years ago, the EOS R was a great camera for me that hit all of my needs. It's just, man, a lot's changed in those 5 years. I have different needs now. Why wasn't I a little bit more adventurous with my camera purchase? Well, that's a whole separate discussion. Okay, but fair enough. I'm gonna buy an R5. I'm too much of a coward to switch brands at this point, fine, but why not wait a tiny bit longer and get the R5 2? 2 is always better than 1, right? Well, first of all, no, that's not right at all. But okay, that would be a very smart chess move, granted. I skipped an entire generation. Very smart. But also waiting a few years and getting $1,000 off, that's also a very good chess move. The R5 is highly discounted right now. And I have no intention of buying any more used cameras, at least in the short term. I've had a bunch of bad experiences doing so lately. Doesn't mean I never will again, I'm sure I will, but I can't take any more used camera heartbreak at the moment. So money, that is a big important reason. But it is not the only reason. There's one that's more philosophical, probably more interesting. It's just going to require a little bit of explanation. But then there's also the fact that, while granted I'm not as busy as I used to be, I am still a working photographer with jobs booked now, and I felt I needed the upgrade now. Not later, not according to some giant corporation's financial timetable, I just needed it now. So, that's when I got it. Now. But I was never into gear. Never did I have the attitude that gear would dictate the sorts of things I'm allowed to do. I always approached photography from the perspective of, here's what I am going to do, so let me go grab my camera and do it. And very specifically my camera, not just a camera, some camera, the camera I am currently the custodian of. And that's kind of how it seems these days. I think that's part of the problem. It was just my camera, end of story. And if the camera fought me, I fought back, or figured out how to work around whatever limitation. But throwing money at the problem, buying a new camera, that's never the sort of solution that would have occurred to me early on in my photography career. I distinctly remember people coming up to me, a very busy working photographer, to have conversations about gear. And I remember me just absolutely zoning out. Could not have been less interested. I get it now, though. I see it from a different perspective, which is nice. It's always nice to have a different perspective. But now I'm that person who talks about gear, thinks about it way too much. So what happened? Like, how did I get this way? Is it too late for me to turn back? Not that it's intrinsically worse, but I think that aspect of myself is worth hanging on to, or worth reacquiring. I want to hang on to the best elements of the photographer I am now, but I want to reacquire the best elements of the photographer I used to be. And I think that was a very good quality, one to be appreciated and cherished. Maybe this is not true universally, across the board. I can only, of course, speak from my own experience, but it seems like very busy working photographers in the trenches, so to speak, don't worry or care about gear very much. They just don't have time to. They're thinking about their next 20 shots that they need to get, how much light is left, prepping for that next big shoot tomorrow. photographers who aren't that busy with photography, that's the state I find myself in these days. I mean, I'm busy with it, but only that which I choose to do. It's not the same at all. Maybe they have a little bit too much time to think. More thinking than doing. This could be a hobbyist or an old pro who just burned out and is now looking for, I don't know, some way to live a happier life at a slower pace. I don't know if that quite captures the spirit of it, but something changed within the last handful of years. And while that change is definitely noticeable to me, it's a little hard to track down when and why, and to get a handle on how I feel about it. But it's okay to be a collector, it's okay to appreciate gear, and it's fun to think about it, talk about it, read about it, fine. It's especially okay if you're rich. If that describes you and you're poor, then life is going to suck. I just want to get back to thinking about the work itself and not getting overly fixated on the tools with which I accomplish it. And it seems like waiting for an R5 II is to be fixated on gear and buying the R5 I, which will work with all my lenses, flashes, batteries. That being the reason I didn't stray from the Canon ecosystem, despite being very tempted to do so. Very, very, very tempted. The R5 felt like the responsible choice. And one in line with the philosophy that I want to reacquire. And I don't know if it's super apparent, I've been switching between the R5 and the R on all of these shots, using them interchangeably. And there's not really a discernible difference in quality. There is when you zoom in, of course, because the R5, of course, has more resolution. But when you don't zoom in, they're indistinguishable, for the most part. Actually, I can perceive the slightly better dynamic range, but it's real subtle. One of the main reasons I upgraded's not the word. I'm going to continue to use them interchangeably for the most part. But wedding receptions, that's the biggest pain point for me. That's where the EOS R just outright fails for stills. It's the only place. I mean, across the board, it's a fucking awesome camera that's just shit in a dark room. Not in the dark, like shooting buildings or landscapes at night. It's great. But shooting people at night? Fucking good luck. So, I have a background as a wedding shooter. I don't do tons these days, but I do some. And goddamn, I just can't do another wedding reception on the EOS R. So, I will use them interchangeably throughout the day, but during the reception, I'm going to switch to the R5. If you don't shoot weddings, not going to be a concern for you. But I do, and it is. But that's literally the only deal breaker for me is wedding receptions. So, if I didn't shoot weddings, and I didn't care about animal face and eye tracking, it wouldn't be worth it to get the EOS R5 for stills. Video's another story, and I'll get to that in a minute. But for stills, there are a lot of little bonuses. But to me, wedding receptions, that's the only deal breaker. And then animal face and eye tracking is kind of a big deal for me. So if those things didn't matter, I would choose the R over the R5. One of the other little bonuses is that, yes, this has 2 card slots. And you'd think as a wedding photographer I'd care more about that. It's sort of probably sacrilege that that's not a big deal to me. But it's not a big deal to me. I shot weddings for 20 plus years. Never had a card fail, not even once. I mean, is it a concern when shooting a wedding on film that you can only load 1 roll of film in your camera at a time? Not a perfect analogy granted, because if you lose 1 single roll of film, you've lost a much smaller percentage of the overall total. Based on that line of thinking, I used to change out my memory cards more often during the day. During the wedding day, I mean. until I realized while I've never had a card fail, I have dropped a memory card on many occasions. And so I figured I was actually putting the images in more danger by changing them out. And so these days I just shoot the entire wedding on one card. I mean, one card per camera. One time I made a list of all the crazy stuff that I could think of that had happened to me at weddings. The grand conceit of my list was, these are the things that are more likely to happen than a memory card failure. Bride getting drunk, setting herself on fire. That had happened to me, so I determined that was more likely than a memory card failure. Bride getting drunk, falling downstairs, breaking leg, also more likely than a memory card failure. But that's just my own subjective experience. Obviously it's not true, because evidently many people have experienced memory card failures. I just haven't. Have I been extremely lucky? I guess. I think it's more that I just always buy them from a reputable place. I buy a reputable brand and I take really good care of them. But of course, be as cautious as you can be within reason. Bring backup camera bodies and whatnot. I mean, because cameras do break down, that's something I've experienced. I've also experienced just cameras outright smashing to fucking bits on the concrete. So you want to have backup gear for sure. You want to back up the images immediately after the wedding. And I used to carry my memory cards separate from the cameras just in case I got robbed. Then at least the images would be safe. So take precautions. It's just, I would never choose a camera based on how many memory card slots. I mean, what if both of them fail? Like, should I only get a camera with 3 memory card slots? And speaking of memory card slots, one of the cards the camera takes is a CFexpress Type B card, which used to be priced like gold. They would be maybe 3-4 times the amount of the equivalent traditional SD card. But those prices have come down significantly. That's just another tick in the column of now being the perfect time. Doesn't matter what's coming next. It's the perfect time for this camera. Which brings me to video, where things change a little bit. I recently stated how little video specs matter to me, but I did so in a video that I had made. And so just let that sink in for a minute. I sure did, and it carried a lot of weight. I realized that maybe video matters to me a little bit more than I was letting on. The EOS R is a dynamite stills camera, besides the few little edge cases I mentioned. But not so good when it comes to video. Oh, the quality is fantastic. Even special, in fact. Akin to like those classic DSLRs that are highly prized these days. I love the way the EOS R video looks, but it's just so inconvenient as a video camera as to be unusable. I use mine with a gimbal because it has no stabilization. At least not any sort of stabilization you would want to use. It has like some shitty algorithmic digital stabilization, which in addition to cropping in on the image, replaces your authentic handheld shake with something even shittier, like some digital artifacty type unnatural movement, which is compounded with the kind of jello rolling shutter effect that the camera has. It's just all bad. You don't want to move the camera around. It's great on a tripod, it's great on a gimbal. But of course, as a hybrid shooter, shooting on a gimbal sucks. It's fine if you're just going to be shooting video for the day, but if you're going to be switching back and forth, God, is a gimbal like such a pain in the ass as to just make you not want to go out and shoot anything. But I do use the gimbal for shooting just family video. I do not use it for YouTube. I don't leave the house with that thing. It's too inconvenient. This R5 just decimates a battery in no time. The R had way better battery life. Significantly, noticeably better. So I've been playing with whether or not to leave image stabilization on the R5. There are 3 choices. Turn it off completely, leave it on all the time, and then also only have it on while you're taking the shot. So I just haven't figured out my strategy yet. In time, I'm sure details like that will shake out. So I love the EOS R for video when I'm at home because I love the way it looks. There's a lot of working around problems, but I have worked around those problems. I use it on a gimbal. I use it with an external recorder because I get higher bit rates, higher bit depth as well. I also use a speed booster because there's a crop. I know I mentioned the crop for stabilization, but there is a significant crop even without stabilization. It's just that stabilization adds additional crop. So the speed booster mostly takes care of that. But the speed booster doesn't necessarily work with every lens, or at least not play nice with them. But I have my whole thing set up where I get like outstanding video with the EOS R. It's just so fucking inconvenient. And that is the last reason I chose to upgrade to the R5. Because the video is phenomenal and convenient, it's stabilized, no external recorder needed, no speed booster because there's no crop. And although I have made statements such as like, hey, video specs aren't that important to me, I think that was the me from 5 years ago talking. Because if they're not important to me, well, they should be. And the truth is they are. And I'm going to make some effort to kind of step it up. But they're both amazing cameras, and I fully expect that 5 years from now, I'm going to be using both the EOS R and the R5 still. Maybe not exclusively. And the R5 just has a few things the R doesn't have. It's a shame that you have to spend thousands to get those things, but that's the reality. Or you just use the one for stills and you go buy another camera exclusively for video, Blackmagic or something. That's a good option too. But video wasn't my only concern. It was a concern, but I feel good about this decision. And let's just see how jealous I get when the R5 II is announced.